Evening all and welcome. Tonight we're going to be heading to Japan for a collection of stories from the middle of nowhere that I'm sure will leave you quite terrified. This is all thanks to my good friend Jay Nightmares, who will be joining us for some of the stories, and if you like his content, feel free to check it out. Links in the description and at the end. But for now it's time to get comfortable and let the darkness take control. This is a story that was shared to me by my grandfather. He grew up during the war, and back then many of the houses had these dirt floors out in the countryside. It was pretty normal in Japan apparently. My father was a taxi driver, and his mother died before he was 5 years old. His dad needed to work every hour God sent him to keep food on the table. It certainly couldn't have been easy back then. Since he was a taxi driver, he worked a lot of antisocial hours. He would stay with his neighbors while his father was working, and when his father finished work, he would come to collect him. It became more and more frequent, and his father didn't want to be a bother to his neighbors after they had been so helpful, so sometimes he knew that he would be home really late. Of course, this situation wasn't ideal, and my grandfather said that he was very lonely and scared, home alone. He would say he would sit on the floor and cry and call for his father often. The neighbors could hear this, but they didn't do much as they didn't want to intervene. One night the neighbor heard my dad's cries stop, and then they heard laughter. They thought to themselves, hey, that's great, maybe his dad's home. But a few hours later, they heard my granddad call out to his father as they came through the door. The neighbor thought it was strange because they were convinced he was talking to someone next door. Over the course of the days and weeks, the neighbors heard my grandpa laughing and talking with someone next door and knew his father was out driving his taxi. The neighbor grew concerned and suspicious, so went to investigate. Apparently my grandpa was sat alone in the kitchen on the dirt floor in the dark, laughing and speaking with something unseen. They were all really worried, so they waited until his father came home. When his dad came home, he was asked directly about who he had been speaking with every night. My grandpa's response? I've been speaking to the mother. I was scared and lonely and crying, so the mother came. She hugs me and rubs my cheeks and cares about me. His father then asks about how this mother was getting in and out, and my granddad pointing at a corner of the kitchen. The dirt was disturbed in this area. There was a gap between the bottom of the wood wall and the dirt floor. Someone could have crawled in and out through that gap. My granddad then said to his dad, she crawls through each night smiling at me. Well, my granddad's dad was disturbed by that and covered the gap with boards and asked for a reduction of hours at work while he looked for a new place to live. Sometimes at night, he said he heard scratching against the boards but could never find anyone out there when he went to look for the source of the sound. This happened when I was working part-time in a hotel. I was a student at the time, and the hotel had been there since before I was born. It was a very historic building. With such a historic building came customary tasks for the new staff. There was a long and established test of courage. So wanting to fit in, I accepted the challenge. It seemed simple enough. I had to walk by myself at midnight up to the 8th floor and do a full lap through the corridors, collecting the customers' breakfast card orders. You know, those cards you tick and hang outside your door. They're pretty old school, but like I said, the hotel is ancient. I wasn't worried, so I accepted the challenge. Just as it was approaching midnight, the staff were telling me stories of horror on the 8th floor. When you're up there, you can hear footsteps following you around. You turn, expecting to see someone staring at you, but you can't see anyone, but you know something's there. Then you turn back around and look down and you see a child in front of you. No, not a child, but a man covered in blood with no legs. They've been cut off. Stuff like that. I knew that was nothing but an urban legend, but in the midnight hour in this historic hotel, I started believing that anything could be possible. I set off the stairs on my solo venture. I wasn't allowed to use the elevator. I had to take the stairs. It was a quiet and spooky walk. As I walked, I was very aware that my back was exposed. I kept checking over my shoulder, and I upped my pace. I wanted to get this over with. I went up to the 4th and 5th floor, and each time I rounded the corridor's inmost corner, I felt a chill. There weren't any air conditioners nearby. I got to the 6th floor and felt the same chill, but this time stronger. By the time I arrived on the 7th floor, I had a near anxiety attack. I had to keep going. I didn't want to lose my job. I imagined how much they would laugh at me. I bet they were watching me on the CCTV cameras already. As I reached the top of the stairs, I felt a very disturbing energy. I really didn't like it on this floor. I felt like the eyes of some unseen predator were on me. Again, it was colder than the previous floors. I was passing the rooms, but suddenly stopped still in front of a room. I didn't know why. It was as if my legs disobeyed me. I could hear a voice, a woman talking in the room. Was she on the phone there? I didn't want to eavesdrop, but I couldn't move. The woman started screaming at someone in there. Her voice was full of pain and anger. It was the room on the innermost corner of the 8th floor. Suddenly, I was able to move again and the chills dissipated. I went around the rest of the floor, got into the elevator, and headed back to the staff room, where I told my colleagues about my experience. Before I could even mention the room on the 8th floor, someone asked, "Did you sense anything odd in the room on the corner?" I said that I did, and they told me what happened. Apparently, on the 8th floor, in the very room I had stopped in front of, a female guest took her own life. Since so many guests complained about the temperature and strange goings-on in that room, it is no longer rented to customers. They explained that they made up the other stories to see if I would notice the room in the corner by myself. I said that I was glad that the dare was over, and that I didn't chicken out halfway. No one smiled, and one of my colleagues held out his hand and offered me the master key. The dare isn't over. I said that there was no way I was going back up there. If you heard someone in that room, we have to go check it out. Someone may be in there. You want to work in the hotel business, this is part of it. Come on. A few of us got in the elevator and headed back up to the 8th floor again. I was dreading it. We approached the door. I inserted the key and unlocked it. I felt for sure I was about to see someone in there, but the room was untouched. I knew I'd heard a voice. We headed back to the staff room and spoke about what happened for a while. Then I was told about the second part of my dare. I really hated it. I was deemed to have the 6th sense that they wanted to put further into the test. I was told about a mountain just behind the hotel. There was a torii there, a huge kind of gate that's common here in Japan. The torii was erected to create a sense of peace there because in days long gone, by that mountain plateau was used as a beheading site. I was to go there and bring something back that they had left by the torii. I was still terrified by the hotel dare. I wasn't ready for this. They said they'd let me do the dare another night. Several days later, I'm out on the night shift as usual. My fellow employees approached me at 2 a.m., and I knew it was time to make my solo trip through the mountains. Heading up the mountain road in the dark, with only a weak flashlight and the moonlight to guide me, was horrible. I could hear the trees swaying and the sound of bugs and frogs. I was thinking about what they could have hidden there. What thing would they have me bring back? I was walking for about 10 minutes, and for some reason the sounds of nature were calming. I no longer felt frightened. When I arrived at the open plateau, there, standing in front of me, was the looming torii. I saw the thing that I was supposed to bring back. I grabbed it straight away, though I thought it was in very poor taste. Before me was a small set of steps, and above it, hanging from the torii with a rope, was a noose. It looked at me as if it was an invitation. I was already mentally writing my resignation letter in my mind as I untied it. I made it back to the staff room, determined to show them that the dare had become too tiresome. I presented the rope and they all looked shocked. They said that they had just left a note there stuck to the torii. I didn't know what to believe. Were they pranking me, on both occasions? Or was there something more sinister at work? Thankfully, I didn't have to find out. I made good on my mental note and resigned shortly after.
I know a ghost story. I don't remember everything perfectly, but I'll try my best. It's about this writer. I can't remember his name. This is a kind of urban legend. This is the kind of story you might hear sat around the campfire on a summer night. Anyway, this writer grew sick of the city, and he wanted to move somewhere else. He wanted to live life deep in the mountains, so he had a small wooden lodge built, and he moved out into the middle of nowhere. There was no electricity, gas, plumbing, or even a phone. There was just a fireplace. So, since the only heat source was a fireplace, the writer spoke with some people in the village at the foot of the mountain and found a married couple who sold charcoal on the side. He spoke with them and worked out a deal where he would get a delivery of charcoal once a week. He was living a good life out there in the mountains. He would plow fields, and when he felt like it, he would write. One peaceful night, he was awoken from his sleep by a strange noise. It was a kind of scratching sound. What the hell was that? With bleary eyes, he went in search of the sound. From here on, I will switch to the first person. There was light. There was a fire still burning in the fireplace, and I could see, albeit it was dark. The lodge wasn't exactly big, so it was easy to see your surroundings. Something stood out. There was something in front of one of the walls. It was just a simple wall made out of logs, and in front of that wall was the silhouette of a person. It was doing something. I couldn't quite make it out though. It looked like a very thin and slim silhouette. It was barely visible in the darkness. It was definitely human-like, and definitely there. I could see from the back. I could only see from the back, but judging from its movements and the direction it was facing, I guessed that it was scratching the wall. It made sense because I could hear that scratching sound. I watched, and its movement continued. I don't know why, but I didn't care all that much. I just kind of fell asleep. Perhaps that was because I was really tired. I don't know. Maybe I'm just a laid-back guy. When I woke up in the morning, I went about my usual morning routine, and I almost didn't notice what was on the wall. Some messy scribbled letters were scrawled on the wall. It was hard to make out what they were, but on closer inspection, I realized that they said, "Kill," and "Help." The color of these letters was pitch black, and I presumed that they were made with charcoal. I looked at the floor, and there was powdered charcoal down there. I was really interested in this, and I wondered if the same phenomenon would happen again at night. When night fell, I made sure that my gas lanterns were lit in all four corners of the lodge, and there was plenty of logs on the fire. If that shadow appeared again, I was ready to take a closer look. I pretended to be asleep in bed, and I waited. I don't know how long I waited, but eventually I heard that scratching sound. I tried to leap out of bed, but I found that I couldn't move a muscle. Was this some kind of sleep paralysis? I guessed so because all I could do was move my eyes. So I looked towards the direction of the scratching sound. Unlike last night, the lodge was much brighter. However, the shadowy figure still looked like a complete dark silhouette. I had moved my bed that night, and this time I was looking at the shadow side on. It was definitely humanoid. It was writing on the wall. I looked at the thing's hand, and I couldn't see any charcoal in its grasp. It was using its finger to write. The moment I realized this, it stopped. It was like I had paused a scene in a movie. It didn't move a muscle. Then, its head slowly turned to face me. It was agonizing. I couldn't take it. I felt as if I was losing my mind. I couldn't turn away, and I couldn't close my eyes. I was about to see its face. It didn't have a face. It was like there was a black hole there. It was entirely featureless. The stench of spoiled and burnt meat attacked my nose, and that was when I realized what it was. It wasn't a shadow. It was a burnt person. I must have passed out, and when I came to in the morning, there were more letters etched into the wooden walls which surrounded me. There was only one word this time, and that word was help. That was all I could stand in that lodge. I got dressed and I ran for the village at the bottom of the mountain. I needed to be around people. It felt like it took the longest time to get back to civilization. I went into the only bar they had there, and I ordered a drink. The barmaster asked me about the lodge, and if everything was okay, and I told him my tale, and I fully expected him to laugh at me, but he didn't. It was here that I heard an unexpected and terrifying story. The couple I had bought the charcoal from had been arrested. They had a daughter, and unbeknownst to the town, they had been punishing her physically. One day, it went too far, and the young high school student sadly passed away. Her parents burned her in an attempt to hide the evidence. They threw her body into a kiln. The daughter's high school teacher was concerned by her absence at school and had her own suspicions about her parents. The police got involved and discovered human remains in the kiln, and her parents were arrested. They confessed under police interrogation. I nearly threw up when something dawned on me. The charcoal that the couple had been delivering. It couldn't be, could it? The daughter's remains? I returned to the lodge after a few more drinks and collected all the remaining pieces of what I was told was charcoal and took them to a local temple to mourn for that girl's spirit.
This happened when I was driving north of Kyoto, and I had a few friends in the car with me. It was late, a little after 1 a.m. My friends and I would often go on night excursions. We would drive around without much intention as to where we were going, and we usually ended up in the middle of nowhere. Thank God for GPS, right? We were driving through a pretty quiet area, and there was a lot of distance between the houses we passed. It was a dark night in late autumn. There was a red light up ahead, and the cars in front slowed to a stop as I did too. I was looking ahead and noticed something about the car. The trunk looked like it was open a little. As I got closer, I realized that it wasn't really my issue, so I started to look away, but as I did, something unexpected happened. A man wearing pajamas rolled out for the trunk and onto the road before the light turned to green. He was a slim, middle-aged man by the look of it. His hands were tied behind his back and he had a gag in his mouth. It was very shocking to see. He rose to his feet, wobbled a little, and then started to walk unsteadily towards my car. He looked utterly terrified. His eyes were dark with fear, his face a twisted plea of desperation. He was on the verge of tears. No, I'll never forget that. You can't forget seeing something like that. His eyes locked with mine and passed over my friends in the car. We were all stunned into silence. The driver's side and the passenger side doors of the car in front opened, and two men emerged from the car. They walked towards the man from the trunk. They quickly caught him, easily. The driver then pulled something out of his pocket. It was a gun. He struck the man and the other man caught him before he fell to the ground. It was raining that night and the windows of the car were shut. But we could all hear the sound of the butt of that gun connecting with the man's head. It made a sickening crack. The two men then returned the man to the trunk and slammed it shut. They looked over their shoulders at us very quickly and turned to their cars. The light turned green and they stepped on it. We were stunned, and we just sat in the car, eyes wide, and stared ahead at the now open road. Then a car from behind us blared its horn and jolted us back to reality. We drove ahead and pulled over to call the police. I was told to wait there because an officer was going to arrive. It took 10 minutes, and during that time my friends and I were pretty much silent. We had nothing to say. We all told the officer when he arrived about what happened. He asked for me to go with him to the police station, and I was more than happy to help in any capacity, and I was interviewed there for about an hour. Over the next few days and weeks, I religiously watched the news, expecting to hear something about what happened that night, but I never heard anything. What happened seemed so unrealistic. It was like a scene from a film. I would question my memory if it wasn't for my friends being in the car with me when it happened. I was young at the time, and I think seeing that incident was the first time I realized that the so-called dark side of the world really does exist. This story is a bit of an urban legend in my town and gets passed around the campfire. It's set in Okinawa. It's about my friend called Caleb. He was a pretty crazy kid when he was younger, but I met him when I was 18. I had just obtained my driver's license and he was always trying to convince our gang of friends to go on road trips. He always wanted to go in search of ghosts or to any haunted locations he could. For example, he was known to go into the abandoned air raid shelters alone in the dead of night. I thought it was just a rumor that there were still skeletons in the air raid shelters, but there were truths to the claims, and this did not deter him. I remember that some of the kids at school said that if you took a photo in a certain air raid shelter at 2 a.m., you would see a spirit in the picture. Others said that if you went swimming at 2 a.m. around the island and had someone take a picture of you, you would see the arms and grasping fingers of those who had met their end in the watery depths trying to reach you. If you aren't convinced, you'd need only remember or research the history surrounding Okinawa in the war. Of course, no one ever had any evidence of these photos to back up the claims, but it was spooky and mildly interesting nonetheless. Caleb wasn't scared of anything, and we all admired his guts and spirit. One night, we all piled into my car as usual. Only we brought along an acquaintance. He was a bit of trouble. That night we were heading to an off-limit wharf he knew about. Seriously, I don't know how I let myself get talked into these situations. We had a kind of mini convoy with 2 cars following mine. The plan was to get close to the water, let off some fireworks, and those who could drink would, while at least 3 of us were left with soft drinks. I had my doubts, to be honest. It was fun. It was one of those summer nights you felt you'd never forget, and which couldn't be truer considering the aftermath. Since it was dark by the wharf, we aimed our cars towards the water's edge to make sure we had enough light. When I say wharf, I don't mean some port filled with boats. This seemed to be someone's private mini-port, and the best thing about it was there were no boats. It was really nice. The headlights were working well. Everyone was in good spirits until someone started shouting about there being something in the water. Well, we all turned to look, and to my surprise, there were about 5 or 6 people in the water. One looked like they could be a child. Some of the guys said that they couldn't see what we were talking about, but to me it was plain. We panicked, as you may imagine in this situation, as there was an uproar, and someone shouted that we should go to a nearby house to see if they had a rope or anything. It was mayhem in those moments. We were shouting out to the water and shouting all at each other. We were just teenagers with no knowledge of how we could help anyone. It was then that an old man stumbled from his house nearby. "What are you doing here? This is off limits." He made me feel like a little kid. Turns out he was a fisherman. One of my pals was stripping off to jump into the water and try and help, but the old man clamped onto his wrist and yanked his arm back. My friend was then wrestled to break free from his grasp, shouting all the while completely transfixed, "They're drowning! Even the little one, I have to try and save them!" The old fisherman commanded him to stop. It was so weird because about half of the people with us were still asking what we were screaming about. The old fisherman's voice cut through the summer sky. "Can't you see it?" He boomed and silenced the lot of us. Of course I could see it. The poor people were drowning right before my eyes. He restrained my friend the moment the tip of his toe reached the wharf's edge and said, "Do they look like they're looking for help?" It dawned on me that no one had heard any screams for help in the water, just panic from us at the shore. We stood in silence watching the waves, and those that could see them in the water were unable to look away. "Look closely, boys. They aren't screaming, are they?" They weren't. No. They're smiling. Sometimes they laugh too. They see people like you who go where you shouldn't go and you get drawn in. They're looking for company. They want you there. That's why it's off limits. I don't want to see any of you around here again, okay? All of us left without a word of complaint, never to return. Those smiling, drowning faces. That was too much.
I work deep in the mountains of Kyushu. We are currently building a huge dam. My life isn't great. Thinking of my workplace and my home life moves me to tears sometimes. My mother is bedridden, and my younger brother has some behavioral issues. Both of them live with me in the dorm that the company has provided me. I really want to quit my job, but I can't. I work 11 hours a day and only get 1 day off a week. My monthly salary is 108,000 yen. The dormitory rent is 45,000 a month. Lunch a month is 9,000. There are some strange management administrative fees which are about 20,000 a month. This leaves around 30,000 yen a month to live off, which is about $265. For recreation, I go to an internet cafe about once or twice a month because it's expensive to get there and back. It can't be helped. I have tried to run away and leave this place a few times. The company cannot be legal. It's like modern slavery. There are so many work-related injuries and deaths, it seems like no one cares. Last month I was working with cement. It was my job to grab bags of cement, open them, and send them off on a conveyor belt. It's a horrible job, but even worse when you have to do it for like 11 hours straight. I opened one bag and noticed that there was something inside. A large, thick envelope was mixed in with the cement. The cement comes from a factory about 20 kilometers away. It's in affiliation with the company I work for. I took the envelope out of the cement bag and put it to one side to read after work. When I opened the envelope later, I found a letter and a kind of rag inside. The letter read, "I work in the cement factory. My boyfriend's job was to put the stones in the crusher. On the morning of the 2nd of February, my boyfriend was loading a particularly large stone into the crusher and fell in with it. I tried to grab him, but it was too late. All I got was a piece of his shirt before he disappeared into the machine. The stones in the crusher were turned an awful red color. Then, they were transported along the conveyor belt to be crushed even smaller and heated to be made into this cement. His body, his bones, his blood is in this cement. All I have left is this scrap of his shirt. The production line was stopped due to the accident, and I was sent to the bagging line. I was forced to pack the cement that included his body. This is how I was able to get this letter in here. I'm writing this letter, hoping, praying. Whoever reads this will reply. I need to know where the cement is going and what it's going to be used for. I'm including my email address. I need you to reply. I don't want this cement to be used in building a house for someone like the director of this company. I couldn't forgive that. Please don't use this cement for something like that. He was only 26 years old. He was kind. He had a strong sense of responsibility, and he made me happy. We only started working for this company to make money for our wedding. I kept saying we should quit because of the pay and the working conditions, but he would always say, "We'll quit soon." I wish I was more forceful. I wish we quit. I had already rented the wedding dress. We were so close. I can't even bury him. There's no body. Our company provided an empty urn. Well, at least I inherited all the things he left behind in our dorm. Please email me. I need to know where this cement is being used, as it will be the closest thing he will ever have to a grave. Whoever you are, please take care of yourself, and please consider getting in touch. I had so many feelings of disgust and sadness. I need to leave this place, but I can't though, because of my mom and my brother. I really wish I could just run away. I'll quit soon though.
I live in the countryside, and there is a place not too far away from my town which is renowned for street racing. I used to head out there all the time. It was just when summer was coming to an end, a weekend night. My friends asked me to go with them to the mountain pass. When we got there, we saw that there were no people in the area, even though it was a weekend. Usually on weekends, there were loads of cars and spectators on the mountain pass. The road looked darker than ever. I thought about why this was, and I pulled into a parking lot which was often used as a place for cars to turn around in. It was the last point to turn around before you reached the mountain pass. There were usually loads of cars parked up in this area, but mine was the only car in the parking lot. The only light in the parking lot beside my headlights were that of a vending machine. I figured that we might be early or something, and some other cars would turn up later, so I got out of the car and used the vending machine to get a drink with my buddy. I was scanning over the empty car park, and my eyes landed on the opposite side of the car park. There were about 5 or 6 men and women. "Oh, looks like someone's coming after all," I said to my friend. It was really dark over that side of the car park, so I couldn't really see the people clearly. My friend started shaking my shoulder and asking us to get back in the car and get the hell out of there. I remember his voice wavering as he asked repeatedly for us to, quote, go home. I was all like, "Hey man, wait up a sec. No one's in there, what's the rush?" My friend didn't smile or change his stance. He wanted to get the hell out of there. I couldn't convince him otherwise. He was already jumped back into the passenger seat and locked his door. I got into the car with him and jokingly asked what the big deal was. "Did you not see those guys? They'd been staring at us the second we went to the vending machine." I could tell that he wasn't lying by the look in his eyes. His eyes kept darting back and forth from mine to the shadowy corner of the parking lot. I was eager to disprove to him, and I didn't want to chicken out of approaching some people on foot in the corner of the car park, so I just revved up my car and blasted on over there. I was turning a corner when something crept into my line of sight. There were several people standing there. I swear their numbers doubled as I grew closer. I felt creeped out. As my car pulled towards the group of people, I noticed that they were glaring at us, and their eyes were black. I screamed, and before I finished screaming, I realized that he was screaming too. The hairs on the back of my neck stood on end. There were others as we sped away, at least what looked like others. They were lining the streets as we sped. There were no other cars on the street that night coming or going, and I've never seen anything like that. Black-eyed people. Well, I guess that some looked like kids.
This happened when I was in university, when I was driving home from a trip. The roads were really dark as I was in the countryside. The mountains and trees were blotting out the moonlight. All of a sudden, my engine began to splutter and slow until it eventually came to a stop. I'm not the best with cars, so rather than waste any time with guesswork, I figured I'd call roadside rescue. I had that as part of my insurance. There was nothing much I could do except wait for someone to arrive. It was creepy out there. The forests are home to strange noises at night. After a little while, a bright light lit up the road and it was aimed at my car. I thought that roadside rescue were early. I couldn't believe my luck. But when the light got closer, I realized that it wasn't them. It was strange. It didn't look like the light of a normal headlights. It stopped about 50 meters in front of my car and didn't move. It was getting a bit weird now. Unlike standard headlights, which are divided into 2 light sources, whatever was in front of me had only the one source of light. That light was so bright it didn't seem safe at all. It seemed not to have the same purpose as a light bulb. I didn't like it. And then I saw them. 3 people approaching from behind the light. These were very thin and very tall, pushing 2 meters, I'd say, 6'6". As they moved from behind the light to in front of it, I could see the lines in their face. Their faces were really gaunt and long. There was something off-putting about these 3 people that I couldn't quite put my finger on at first, but then I realized what it was. Their style of clothes and hair, etc. They looked like they were from another time period. It was like they had been wearing the same clothes since the 70s. They were wearing chinos, polo shirts, stuff like that. They approached my car, and one of them spoke to me. Once again, I noticed there was something slightly off-putting about these people. When they spoke, it had all the wrong intonations. Like, he was emphasizing the wrong syllables. I'm not quite sure how to explain it, but it just wasn't right. It made listening to them difficult. Yet, I detected no accent to indicate that they were foreign. "Where did you come from?" he asked. I chose to remain silent before answering that. I didn't want to let these strangers know about my car's engine trouble, because essentially, I couldn't get away from them. "You have a trouble with your car, and I can fix it," he said. It scared me that he knew that. I said thanks, but no thanks. I had already called roadside rescue. The man was persistent. They kept refusing. I really didn't want to speak to these guys out here in the woods alone. Then the strangest thing happened. My thoughts felt like they were changing. Like I had to mentally wrestle with myself not to allow them to work on my car. It felt like my mind was being changed for me. I started to wonder if maybe they could help. Maybe it would be a good idea to unlock the door and let them in. I got out of my car, half of my mind screaming at the other half, imploring me to get back into my car and get the doors locked again. I couldn't fight it. I started following them towards the light. I was completely transfixed. I didn't need to think for myself. I tried to raise my arm, but I couldn't because I wasn't in control of it. I wanted to be scared, but this calm voice inside my head reassured me that there was nothing to fear. That part of me was still screaming to do anything I could to get away from these men, but that internal voice of mine was getting quieter and quieter. While I was walking towards that bright light, my phone started to ring. It must be the roadside rescue people. It snapped me back to reality. I was in control again. I was able to answer the phone. I was back. I knew that that phone needed to be on. Something about that call saved me. I must have explained my location in about 10 different ways to the rescue people. I really wanted to be accurate. I didn't want to be out here anymore. Whilst I was on the phone, the men were trying to get me to take up their offer of help. I hated the way they towered over me. In their faces, they were so pale and thin, like barn owls. I refused. I had to. I ran back to my car with my phone clamped to the side of my head. And that was when they began to get angry. They were screaming and shouting by the side of my door. I began to doubt myself. Usually I would never refuse a kind favor, as I would be willing to do the same for someone in my situation, but given what just happened, I knew I couldn't trust these men. They were trying to express anger, but it was like the concept was entirely new to them. Eventually they gave up and headed back towards the beam of light. Before leaving, they did this weird thing simultaneously in front of my car. They placed an open palm on their foreheads and then slapped it. It's like as if you're doing a high five to your own head. Their fingers were long and spider-like. I don't have a clue what that gesture is supposed to mean. The light then shot backwards at tremendous speed and it was gone. Shortly after, the roadside rescue team showed up. The guy went to check the engine and couldn't find a single fault with it. He put my keys back in the ignition, turned it, and my engine started without issue. That really freaks me out because I know that my engine stopped. I hated it, but I needed to get out of the woods. I headed in the direction the light shot off in and managed to get home without any further incident. However, when I woke up the next day, I had a really strange rash all over my body. I went to see a dermatologist and he couldn't figure out the cause of the rash. I think the rash went away after 10 days or so with the cream and ointment I got from the dermatologist. I'm sure that rash was related to the bright light and those 3 men. Well, I say men, I'm not entirely convinced of that fact. About 2 years after this happened, I was at a party and a woman said that when she was driving out in the mountains in the same area that I was with her boyfriend, they said they saw something similar to what I did. She said on 2 occasions she saw beams of light flying across the night sky. Some people snickered at that, but I didn't. It felt all too real. Did we have some sort of encounter with a UFO? It must be really hard to believe this, but I wish I could just give you my memories or my mind for a while. The fear those 3 tall men instilled in me was otherworldly. That said, I don't know why my mind changed to trusting them like a light switch being switched on and off. It lingers in my thoughts often. It was truly disturbing.
This is a strange and mysterious incident that happened to me deep in the mountains one night about 7 years ago in October. I was a student, and for some reason amongst my friends and fellow students it was very popular to camp in the mountains alone. Maybe we thought it was really zen and cool or a test of courage. It didn't involve anything too taxing, no hiking or anything like that, just a simple one-person camp out in the woods. It was like a rite of passage or something. Everyone would come back from their solo trip and have a story to tell. I wanted to try it for myself. I found a place to camp and set up a tent. I made a little fire, cooked a meal, and enjoyed the simplistic pleasure of achievement this gave me. I have a vague memory of staring at the embers of the fire. It was hypnotic. I had no idea how long I had been doing that. I was thinking of turning in for the night. The day's activities in the night air had taken a toll on me and made me sleepy. I casually looked up and my eyes were drawn to the forest ahead of my camp. Just over the flicker of the fire, I saw a sea of dense trees, no more than about 20 meters ahead of me. It was amidst those trees that I spotted something pale. I stared at the trees, trying to figure out what it was I was looking at, and then I heard myself mutter, "Why is it only a face?" Because there between the trees I saw a face peering out at me in the dark. The forest was pitch black, yet the face was visible and, like I said, about 20 meters away from the mouth of the woods. There was no reason why I should be able to see someone standing there without the aid of any light. The face floated. It seemed to be at about 10 meters off the ground. Usually in situations like this, people ran away or screamed, but I felt completely calm. I thought I was just overtired or something. I prioritized doubt over fear, and I tried to remain logical. After about a minute or two of watching the face in the woods, or perhaps a minute or two of the face in the woods watching me, it vanished. I sat there mentally asking myself questions about what I had just seen. My eyes were naturally drawn back to my fire, and the face which had appeared in the woods was suddenly just beyond the fire. Up close I could see that the owner of the face looked to be about 40. The expression was completely blank. One word came to mind: void. I was freaked out massively as to how this was even possible. In the time it took me to look away from the woods, it was right next to my fire. I was frightened and once again heard myself ask a question out loud. "What are you?" The words tumbled out of my mouth unintentionally. When I think about this incident now, I'm at a loss as to why I wasn't in control of what I said that night. It was as if I was just responding with instinct, like the animals of the woods. Whatever I said seemed to have worked, because as soon as I said that, the face vanished. That face appeared because it wanted something. I just don't think it realized I wasn't vulnerable until it came close. Thank God my instincts kicked in. When I read about all the missing people cases which are reported across the world, I somehow remember that night and shudder.
This happened when I started living alone. Not long after I had just moved in. I think it must have been the first week. I found out that my new apartment was in the path of an oncoming typhoon. That night I had gotten off to sleep all right, but I awoke in the middle of the night to hear the sound of wind and rain lashing my windows. It was so loud. I just couldn't get back to sleep. I was lying there in bed, thinking about nothing in particular, when I heard. It was coming from the front door. It was the doorbell. Who the hell would be ringing the doorbell of my new apartment? I asked myself. I crept downstairs and I took a look through the peephole. There was a person out there. I was freaked out, but I asked, "Who is it?" I could hear the fear in my voice. "Hey, it's me, man." It was my friend. Literally, my best friend. He was one of the only ones who knew my address. "Why didn't you just tell me you were coming over, man? It's like the middle of the night," I said through the door. I tried to get a look at him, but it was dark and he had his hat pulled down. That didn't matter because we were friends. I mean, it was a little weird, but I've known him for years. "Hey, you really did well to get here in this storm, dude," I called out as I started to unlock the door. That was the moment that something dawned on me. Best friend or not, why was he out here, barely talking, and how did he make it here? I could still hear the ferocity of the typhoon against the door. Another odd thing, he didn't have a driver's license. Even if he somehow caught a bus, he would have had to walk for a long while. There were no bus stops nearby. I didn't know the area all that well, but it seemed a bit too late for buses. Besides, who turns up in the middle of the night, during a storm, unannounced? These were all red flags, and I didn't like them. What the hell was this? I brought my eye closer to the peephole. "Hey, bud, how did you get here?" I asked cautiously. We fell into an awkward silence while the typhoon raged on. I brought my eye closer to the peephole. I wanted to catch a closer look at him. His skin was disturbingly pale. It reminded me of a waxwork skin. His eyes flitted back and forth, as if they were remote controlled. That wasn't my friend. I wasn't even sure that was a human. It was pretending, whatever it was. I didn't let on that I was scared, but I was petrified. I watched that thing out there, which looked like my best friend, stand there and smile inanely, occasionally twitching at the corners of its lips. I had to get away from the door once I saw that. I went into another room and I tried my best to compose myself. I tried to think about what to do next. All the while, that friend thing repeated the same line it delivered earlier, as if it was all it knew. Like it was an actor practicing its lines. "Hey, it's me, man." I called my friend, the one it was impersonating. He said that it wasn't him. I knew it wasn't him, but I just had to be 100% sure. That thing was very convincing. I went upstairs and went back to bed, but sleep wouldn't come. I didn't know how long that thing stayed outside my door, but I heard it occasionally repeating its line. "Hey, it's me, man." After a sleepless night, the sun rose and the typhoon subsided. It took a long while for me to get up the confidence to approach the peephole, but when I did, I found that it was gone.
When I was a kid, I'd always wanted to drive, and when I was in school I wanted to be the first of my friends to have their own driving license and a car. I worked a part-time job in high school and saved every penny I made. I was on a goal of getting a car. When I reached my second year of college, I was lucky enough that I could finally afford my own car, and I had passed all my driving tests. I was unbelievably proud to own my own vehicle, even though it was second-hand. It was a sedan, and a bit of a dinosaur. Hybrids were coming out and newer cars had better gas consumption rates, but I didn't care. I worked hard for that car and I loved it, even if it was a gas guzzler. I was okay with not having the most popular car among my friends. I got ripped on by some friends for driving an old man car, but hey, they didn't complain when they needed a ride. I always drove safely, by the way. I didn't want to damage my precious car or risk losing my license. I didn't use it all that much in the beginning. Perhaps I was nervous. After about half a year, I got used to driving alone for long periods, and I remember one night feeling a bit more confident than usual after I had finished my shift. I dumped my things at home and took my car for a long solo drive. It was around 10 p.m. I had no destination in mind. I was happy so long as there was a road ahead of me. I went through residential areas and downtown that I hadn't been to before. It was pretty cool. I was finally enjoying the sense of freedom I thought I would always have by owning a car. That was until I heard it. There was a dull thudding sound coming from behind me. I was worried that I had perhaps run something over. It sounded like something had happened to one of the rear tire wheels. Perhaps I'd accidentally gone up the curb? No, that wasn't it. While considering these options, I heard the sound again. It was the same dull thudding sound coming from the space behind me. So I pulled over at the end of the road and got out and checked, but I couldn't find anything wrong with the vehicle. The tires were in great condition. Next, I checked the trunk and all the maintenance supplies. Nothing had fallen over. I looked into the dark trunk and felt something strange. I have no reason as to why, but something just felt off. The dark, empty, wide trunk was staring at me, and I felt something akin to nausea. Time to go home, I thought. I shut the trunk and hopped back into the car. On the drive back, it felt like something was staring at me from back there. I didn't use the car for a few days after that, because I became busy working and was doing tests for college. When the tests were over, I got a call from one of my friends asking if he could come with me for a night drive. He said he would even pay for the gas. That's when I remembered the weird thudding sounds and the strange feeling of being watched from the last time I had gone for a drive, and hesitated for a moment. I told myself I was worrying about nothing, and to go out and enjoy the drive with my friend. I picked up my friend in front of the train station, and I was wondering how far we would dare to drive that night. It was rich with possibility. He got in, and we were driving along talking about nothing in particular, just joking around and having a laugh. I was wide awake. I could see myself and my friend staying up all night, enjoying pleasant conversation. I set the satellite navigation to avoid toll roads, and we just drove wherever the road took us. After a while, I realized that my friend had gone quite quiet on me. I asked him if he was feeling carsick, since we had gone through a few winding, dark roads. He said that he wasn't carsick. "Is everything okay? You know, with the car?" he asked. I was curious as to what he was implying, because in my mind, when you ask someone if everything is okay with their car, what they mean is everything okay with your driving? Well, that's how it felt. There was nothing wrong with my driving or the car, I thought. The engine and the brakes were in great shape. I replied by telling him I had only recently just got it serviced, so there were no issues. He then surprised me by saying the following. "Oh, it's just that I heard this banging sound coming from the back." I said to my friend that I had heard some noises coming from the trunk before. He seemed a little worried, so I said that we would pull over and take a look to put his mind at ease. By the way, in case you haven't guessed it, I'm not talking about the same friend from before. I was sick of the noises at this point, so I was more than happy to show him what I already knew, that there was nothing in the truck out of the ordinary. Still, when I opened the trunk, I felt that dark atmosphere leak out. The air suddenly seemed cold and unpleasant. My friend pulled out a small flashlight attached to his keychain and illuminated the trunk. It looked as I expected. All the maintenance things were still in there and nothing had toppled over. "Ah, look, there seems to be something wrong back here," he said. His face was painted a ghastly shade of white. He shone the torch all around the truck. "That doesn't look right. It looks like something's leaking, man." "What?" I was confused. There did appear to be some sort of leak. The grey interior of the trunk had now turned a dark reddish brown. It didn't look like an oil leak. And I know I'm not a professional, but I've never heard of an oil leak in the trunk before. My friend looked at me and asked, "Is that blood?" I had no words for him. It sure looked like it, but I knew that it couldn't be possible. I didn't say a word and just wanted to go home. All the while I felt that same uneasy feeling of someone looking at me while we drove home. I didn't talk much with my friend on the way back. The atmosphere felt heavy. I put the car on the market after that and was grateful to find a buyer quickly. There was something off with that car. What was it used for in the past, I wonder? Who was the previous owner? And what had happened in the trunk? All questions I would love answers for, but I know I'll never get them. This happened when I was a student at university. In December, our university always offered a 2-week mountain climbing retreat to our students, and I decided to go. We were hiking and it snowed more than previous years, so a decision was made to take refuge in an emergency shelter. The wind was howling and the snow was unrelenting. The bitter cold was too much to bear. When we got to the hut, we found out that another party was already using it. The teacher said quietly that he found it strange that the others were in the lodge and that they were so quiet. It was worse than that. I thought the atmosphere was downright gloomy and depressing. After dinner, the leader of the other party suddenly stood up and came over to us and struck up a conversation, and the reason for the hushed silence was revealed. There was a blizzard yesterday, and an inexperienced hiker burst into the emergency shelter and collapsed due to fatigue. He seemed exhausted, dehydrated, and malnourished. He took a turn for the worse, perhaps due to the shock and exposure he had suffered, and fell unconscious, and when dawn broke, his breathing had ceased and no one could find a pulse. They said that they had no other choice but to store the body in the closet until the snowstorm outside subsided. They said they removed the floorboards and placed the body on the soil in the closet, and then relaid the floorboards over it. I was so horrified with the idea that I would be sharing the same cabin as a corpse, and was so dejected that there was nothing I could do to remedy the situation. Chills worse than what I felt outside coursed through my body. The lights went out early, and we turned in for the night since we were all eager to leave at first light. I remember falling asleep pretty quickly despite the setting. I guess that the hike had taken it out of me. I don't know how many hours I had been asleep for, but suddenly I was awake, and there was this scratching sound. I looked around and saw eyes, lit by the white snow and pale moonlight, looking in my direction. Everyone in the cabin had heard what I heard, and everyone's eyes were on the closet. No one said a word. We shared a terrified silence which was only occasionally broken by that dreadful scratching. A moment passed and then panic began to creep in. People in their sleeping bags shuffled backwards and sped away from the closet, trying to get their backs to the cabin walls. Someone mumbled, "I can't sleep." And with that, the leader of the other group got to his feet and raced over to the closet. He then threw the door open and stepped inside, and we heard him shifting stuff around in there, I guess checking on the poor hiker. Moments later, he walked out with a sober expression and stated, "I don't think anything has changed." It was as if he was saying it for his own benefit rather than the others in the cabin. He then slowly slid the closet door shut with a creak and made his way back to his own sleeping bag. Before he reached it, we heard that same dreadful scratching sound. We watched in horror as some of us, through tear-filled eyes, as the door to the closet began to rattle. Near silent gasps filled the cabin. The terror was palpable. The door to the closet looked as if someone was heaving their body weight against it. If you dared to look closely, you could see the door give with the weight behind it. Yet we all knew that there was nothing but a body beyond the closet door. Not one of us was able to fall asleep again that night. We sat up in horror waiting for the first light of morning to break. The search and rescue team arrived just after dawn, and we walked with them to the closet. When they opened the door, we saw scratch marks against the inside of it and all over the floorboards. The body was just where it was supposed to be, wrapped up in a sleeping bag in the exact same position.
My granddad told me that the most important thing you can take while hiking in the mountains is the radio. He showed me his one. It was a small battery-powered one, and it barely weighed a thing. So based on his advice, I got a license for a radio, so I could use it on every trip I took. No matter how many advances have been made in cell phone technology, most modern cell phones cannot hold a signal in the mountains and therefore are unreliable in an emergency. A radio can help pinpoint exact locations for search and rescue parties and exchange information about weather and other warnings. In a true SOS emergency, you want a radio. So this is my granddad's story. He said that he set off climbing into the mountains with his radio. It was summer and he planned a 3-day, 2-night camp. He set off at about 3 p.m. As he was looking forward to camping, he said he only hiked for about 2 hours and then started to set up his camp at around 5. He camped in a place that he had camped in before with some of his hiker friends. He described it as a calm and safe area. He made a fire and prepared dinner, ate well, and drank beneath the fading summer bright night sky. He took out his radio and scanned to see if anyone was in the area. He said that he often chatted with other hikers, and even strangers on his radio. It was a good way to share information and help one another out. The frequencies he used were 144 and 430 megahertz. These are standard for most radios. My grandpa tried to make the range of his frequencies as wide as possible. He was able to receive transmissions from various frequencies. This is an account he heard from his radio that night.
Point. Another pass. And well, I guess it's the place. You know? Do for me.
Grandpa responded by stating his location, asking for their position.
It's where I am now. Around me a lot.
Grandpa obviously couldn't make out what the guy was saying, so he asked again.
Face. I'm at the face. I repeat, face rock.
Face rock? My granddad thought. Then it dawned on him. A few hours from his location there was a famous landmark, and it was a rock which looked like it had a face. He knew the place well, and would leave in the morning to find this person if they needed help. Please confirm, are you by the rock shaped like a face? Should I call in a search and rescue team? Thereafter, nothing but static hissed in response. It was a slightly creepy state of affairs. My grandfather felt that the person who he spoke with was in danger and he thought he should call search and rescue before it got too late. Things were even weirder because no matter how many times he radioed search and rescue, he never got a response. His radio was also suffering significant signal loss, which really stumped him. With little other options, my grandfather turned in for the night, in the hope that he would find the stranded person himself at the rock shaped like a face in the morning. He barely slept that night. Originally he intended on leaving at 6, but he left at 4. He was very concerned. While he was walking, he was trying to get in touch with the stranded person again, and eventually, he got a response.
Still here.
That's great, I'm about an hour's away from you are. Now I need you to stay there, Grandpa replied.
Around. I'm a bit scared.
Do you need a search and rescue team? Medical support, how can I help? Grandpa replied.
It's no good, man, to do.
He said that the voice seemed to be horrified by something and was sounding more and more erratic, so he radioed through to the search and rescue team once more. He connected with them with ease this time. He guessed that this was because he was in a slightly higher location, with better signal. The search and rescue team had reported no missing people or any calls for distress in the last week. They said that they were unable to get a team out there straight away, so they would get a regular helicopter patrol over the area instead. My grandfather now felt that the person's chances of survival were firmly planted on his shoulders. When he heard this, he began to quicken his pace. He finally got to the face-shaped rock and immediately tried to make contact with the distressed person.
Not sure how. It's bad.
The voice replied. Where are you? Granddad asked.
Where you are?
I am just to the east of the face-shaped rock.
It's no good. Pull it.
It seemed as if the signal was a tiny bit better than last time, so he must have gotten closer, he thought. Have you been in an accident? Grandpa asked.
Oh God, help me.
After hearing this terrifying plea for help, Grandpa radioed back to the search and rescue team and demanded more assistance. He would continue to search for this person until they arrived. The face-shaped rock was in a chasm, and a place where you would expect accidents to occur. The voice amidst the sea of static on the radio didn't seem to be in pain, though. They just seemed to be utterly horrified by something. He was searching everywhere in that chasm for any sign of life. A rucksack, some footprints, maybe even blood, but he found nothing. My grandfather was understandably exhausted at this point, so he climbed to the top of a large boulder and waited for the search and rescue team to arrive while attempting to make contact with the distressed person.
It's tired.
"Can you hear me?" Grandpa responded.
I think I can hear you. Close, I think.
"If you can hear me, then I'm going to make some noise now. Just come to the sound of the noise or tell me which direction you heard it from, okay?" Due to the chasm, any sounds should be clearly audible, even if they were minuscule. So Grandpa hurls a rock into the chasm, and the sound was clearly audible.
Heard it.
Great. What direction did you hear it come from?
I think definitely south.
Did you say south? Did he say south? Because that would be really weird, Grandpa thought. If he heard the noise come through the south, then he would be north of my grandfather's position. But if you go north, it's nothing but a cliff face. This was around the time that the search and rescue team arrived, and Grandpa explained everything to them, and they told him that they would take it from there. Since my grandfather was completely drained at this point, he gratefully accepted, and after resting for a while, he began to head back down the mountain. He was in contact with the search and rescue team all the while, asking if they had found the distressed man, but they hadn't. So he was trying to contact him himself.
Something here. So many.
That was the last communication he heard. Search and rescue were unable to make contact or find anyone either. A few years later, my grandfather was telling this story to some of his hiking friends who said that there had been a body discovered at the rock which looked like a face. The victim had innumerable cuts all over their body. It is unsure if these incidents are connected, but my grandfather, he doesn't like to go anywhere near that face-shaped rock anymore.
Hey guys, it's Mort here, and thank you so much for listening. I really appreciate you guys making it to the end of the video. It was a really fun one. I loved these stories. Thank you to J Nightmares for providing them all and for joining us in tonight's video. It really means a lot. Thanks, buddy. Don't forget that if you enjoyed his narrations or these stories, you can check him out as well. He does do some pretty good stories. Very good. Really top-notch stuff, to be honest. And yeah, they're all thanks to him, really. This video is all thanks to him. And he does these kind of stories all the time on his channel. I think you guys will really like them. I really like them. So yeah, links on screen now if you want to check him out. And as always, a huge thanks to the members and patrons who made this video possible. But for now, I'll leave you there. Stay awesome, and I'll see you in the next one.